من جوال يهودية قتلتها وقتلت جوزها، عصرة بيدي يابا قتلت
الله
عصرة.
أكبر ولله الحمد.
يابا عصرة
الله أكبر
بيدي
ولله
قتلت.
الحمد.
يابا افتح الوقت شوف كيف قتلت يابا. شوف كيف قتلت بيدي يابا، ابنك قتل يهود.
ربنا يحميك يا رب، ربنا يحميك يا
هاي
رب.
قتلت بيدي يابا، ابنك قتل يهود. هاي دخل مبلسين
الله
يابا.
أكبر، الله أكبر.
Do you all remember where you were on the 7th of October?
On October 7th, we were driving to a meeting and we listened to the news, which we sometimes do for about 10 minutes, and it was the news of the hostage taking. And I just felt like I needed to just almost pull over and process this. I mean, it was so personal and invasive, and well, it is. I mean, they're used to that. The Iron Dome does its thing, and this was
more personal.
yeah, and just terrifying in a very different way because the defenses weren't there.
I think my heart sank similarly to yours on October 7th for so many reasons, knowing that this was worse than what we've seen in many years at this point, and it was so personal and violent and horrifying to see, and there were people I needed to check on. But at the same time, it was just horrifying to think ahead to that this is just the start. This isn't going to be an isolated incident. This is going to lead to so many more lives lost, and it was so heartbreaking.
And that's what makes me so sad about things in Gaza, because honestly, it is a prison. And what you're seeing is sort of a prison riot. This sort of idea of these people have, and in Israel, we've got this Iron Dome, we can just forget about everything. And maybe they'll launch their rockets and we'll be protected. And October 7th was, no, that's not the case. These are real people under here, and they're going to find some way to fight back.
How do we handle that from a biblical point of view when you've got our understanding of who Israel is and the Jewish people are and the Arabs are, and how do we handle all this conflict in terms of neighbours, friends, workfellows, people like that, even among ourselves? Are there differences of view about this?
I think we all need to be very careful about using the word excited. We are not excited about what's happening over there. People are losing their lives. It's trauma. It's horrors we can't even picture, and I don't even think we know the half of it very. So we're not excited, and we need to remember not to use that kind of language.
Maybe just how we say we're excited. This is reminding me that I am excited for Christ to come back.
Right.
Because of these horrors happening.
But
we're not qualifying that, and then can come off really not great.
Something that I've struggled with is I grew up with so much excitement around 1948 and of course the return to the land, and so because of that I grew up with just unequivocal support of the state of Israel. No separation between that and Jewish people, no separation between that and really God's plan. And as I started even just spending time there, honestly, it's challenging to see some of the things that Netanyahu does. It's challenging to see some of the actions being taken now, and I started to really fall away from this because I'm Christadelphian, because I'm Christian, because I support the Jews, that I just blindly support Israel. And I very much understand our kind of stance as a community in feeling that way, and I used to as well, but it's been so difficult to really support their actions on the ground. And Netanyahu has said things that are really not Christ-like at all and has...
He's not a Christian, mind you.
Of course, yeah. But it's just, it's hard to...
They're a secular nation.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
You've got it exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So you asked about having conversations with people, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers. And one of the things that I think is tricky is we're kind of all on the same page in the sense that we have what I would call a biblical worldview. But my friend down the street, who is not a Christian, she's looking at it purely from the political, geopolitical, the history, who moved there, and that's not right. And so for me, it's very challenging to have conversations about what's right, what's not, what's going to happen with people that who aren't coming from a biblical worldview, because I don't think you can explain, like you said at the beginning, they're there because God says, I give you this land, I will plant you there, I will give it to you forever.
Yeah, so, and this is the sort of thing, Christadelphians, because they read the Bible a lot, tend to be very pro-Jewish. But that's not necessarily right. And so my niece, for instance, she has friends who are Arabs and are very pro-Palestinian, and she's going, you say that you care about loving people and doing the right thing, and why are you supporting this group of people that's just trying to kill all the Palestinians in here? This isn't right. Why are we not trying to stick up for the underdog here, the people who are being oppressed? Isn't that what you Christians, because she doesn't consider herself a Christian, isn't that what you're supposed to do? And then, of course, the rest of my family is all like, no, and starts pulling out the talking points about how, Israel's just defending themselves, they have a right to exist, they're God's chosen people, the Palestinians shouldn't be there, and you end up with sort of a shouting match going around the dinner table at this point.
Okay, that's right, okay.
And what actually is the right answer here? I don't want to be just politically supporting the Israeli government or just politically supporting the Palestinian people. I want to be on God's side. What is God's side?
You bring up an interesting point, because let's go back in biblical history to talk about Israel going into the land from Egypt. God said to the people, now look, don't mix with the local population. They do child sacrifice, extreme idolatry, extreme immorality. So they go in. The first city they captured was what?
Jericho?
Jericho, right. And I will say to you that if everybody is in Jericho was like Rahab, that city would not have been destroyed. If all the people were like Rahab and reckoned, yes, we've heard what happened in Egypt, we've heard about the Exodus and so on and so forth, but we understand that your God has a plan for you, they would not have been destroyed. It's people's reaction to the purpose of God, in this case Israel, that creates the problem. And it becomes a moral issue, because people look at the Old Testament and sort of talk about genocide, which has been going on all over the world for many, many generations.
That doesn't make it right.
By whose standard? By our standard or God's standard?
I completely agree with you. There is a phrase in Isaiah 43 that I come back to a lot in my mind, where God is speaking to the nation. It is the nation of Israel, and he calls them his witnesses, that he is the true God. That's the phrase used. You are my witnesses. And that's for me where I'm not excited by what's happening in Israel. But I look at that, and it's that reminder that Israel, in its state, in its flawed state, is there because they are a testament that their God is the true God of the entire universe.
And one reason why, similarly to you, I think, Caitlin, I really hold on to the Jewish people in some regards, is because it's just a symbol. It's not about the people, but it's a symbol of God's grace. And that's just how, that's so important.
I like that you said that they're a symbol, because that's the word I was coming to as well. And a symbol of God's grace, I think, is a really apt term. It's not that we're supporting the actions, or at least myself, I can't speak to everyone individually, in support of Israel's actions as a secular nation, but they do hold a special place in God's heart, because they continue to be the torchbearers for his message and a symbol of his plan, despite millenniums of persecution and the preservation of God's word that has come out of that.
But shouldn't we be more neutral because we're reading the Bible? We're not listening to the propaganda, we're listening to what God says. Shouldn't we be able to step back and go, this is just Benjamin Netanyahu trying to get reelected. This is just Hamas trying to stay in power. Isn't it the biblical worldview that allows us to step back and be like, no, what is God actually doing here? What is actually right and what's actually wrong, as opposed to whatever this politician or that politician is trying to portray or espouse?
And that's sometimes where, like, I have found myself more recently separating the Jewish people and the hope of Israel as a concept from the secular state that we're talking about. The way that the land was taken back was not good. Like, it was obviously for the purpose of the Jews returning to the land, and we see how that fits into prophecy. And at the same time, the Palestinians who lived there were dispossessed. Their towns were destroyed, and that led to so much anger that has brought us to today. And so it's really hard for me to look and say that God's chosen people are represented by that secular state. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but it's hard for me to see and say, yes, Israel all the way, when there are horrific actions that are taking place.
But that's, I guess we got to be careful here too, though, because, and having Jewish background, my mother being Jewish, I find I talk to a lot of people and they have no understanding of the Jews, that they say like they're colonizers. But like when you go back, it's not like that. Like it's a lot more fragile and a lot more pain and suffering than what you would expect. And like, all of the countries around them deeply despise them, and whenever they had a chance in the last 100 years have tried to completely destroy them. But what I need to be challenged to think is that, well, 1967, all those things that happened, it was miraculous. It wasn't strength and human strength. It was God helping them. And just Israel's been facing that their whole, like the Jews, why did they come to Israel? Because they had nowhere else to go.
What you said just reminded me of something, and you said, why are the Jewish people so hated? And I think when we can step back, kind of to your point, we realize that, why do any of us go through trial in our life? And I'm not trying to equate my trial to what Israel is going through, but it's because if they were not so hated by the nations around them, they would be amalgamated into them and completely lose their faith. And so it continues to happen today, unfortunately, because this is just how God's going to end up preserving them.
Right, that's like again, if we look at geopolitically, I completely agree with what you said, how that kind of came to be. But then even further back in the Bible, it's like when Abraham had two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, they hate each other. We have Jacob and Esau, that's perpetuated. If you're not reading that, it does seem you can't overlay kind of that lens on top of what happened when Israel took its land back. It just so much starts in history that we can read about, and it doesn't make it easier to digest maybe, but it's God's way.
So what about the Christians, though, who are Palestinians? So if we're talking about our spiritual family, if we have actual spiritual family over there, what are we supposed to be doing?
What do you think we could do?
That's a good question. That is an excellent question. Should I be donating to charities to help take care of Palestinian children?
The question might be, try to go above this. The best thing that we could do for anybody in a situation like that is to present to them there is a solution to this problem, but it's not human, it's spiritual. It's beyond human capacity to change our human nature so that the Arabs will love the Jews and the Jews will love the Arabs. It will take more than human nature to really deal with this.
God is the only solution to it. He was also kind enough to give us an example in his son of how we can approach such confusing and distressing situations. Jesus gave us example after example and parables because he was living in a similar world, the same world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same pressure points. And why was it that Jesus was hated, do you think?
Because he said the truth that nobody wanted to hear.
Exactly. So you find in the conflict that's going on in the world today, if we try to take one side or the other at a political level, we'll get ourselves into trouble because we can't defend at a political level what's being done in any country. We can't.
And I think it's very much human nature just to take such polarizing sides, and I've definitely even seen that in our community, that we can jump to just saying that all Arabs are bad or all Palestinians are evil, or equating the civilians with
Jewish people
Hamas.
are good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because there are many Jewish people who are very secular and wouldn't even agree with anything that we're saying, you know? But as you're saying, we're called to be peacemakers, and that can give us a little bit more political neutrality here because, like you said, it's Christ and it's God who have the solution to this.
But for the work of the peacemaker to be successful, you need a peace receiver. If there's no peace receiver, the work of the peacemaker is only half done and unfulfilled.
So in some ways, the best thing we could possibly do is spread God's message, because that's the only thing that's really going to bring peace.
Well, I think about how Jesus treated the Samaritans, and not the simplistic, like he was nice to everyone, but he saw them as foreigners. He knew that the land was not promised to them, and yet he would treat a Samaritan that he found on the street with grace and with love, and hoping that they would come to belief in God and belief in the promised land, and that it was promised to the Jews. And I think that can be a really great example for us.
Yeah, but I do think, like, as you're getting at there, Jesus' way is very different. And one of the big ones is the love your enemies thing. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for them who despitefully use you and abuse you. Like, that's really hard to do, but that's how we get out of that eye for an eye sort of idea where you hurt me, I'll hurt you back even more, and then but Jesus' way is you hurt me and I'll help you.
And I'll forgive you.
Yeah. Forgiveness, love, these are things that are still rare in our world because they are very against our nature.
There's an upside down teaching that Jesus had.
Yes.
Golda Meir possibly once said, there will never be peace between Israel and the Arabs until the Arabs love their children more than they hate the Jews. Now think about that. Children, in relation to Hamas and what's been going on there in Rafah and other places, innocent children dying, yes, there have been. But there's a balance in all this. So, and the interesting question is, from a biblical perspective, can we reconcile it? Is it possible to reconcile it? Can we sort of balance this, our understanding of these things in the light of what's in the scriptures, with what we see going on in the land, and the sympathies we have to those who are suffering so greatly? Yes, at the hands of their leaders.
Yes, I think it's important to remember that a lot of the suffering for the Palestinian people, which is terrible, inexcusable, inhumane, is actually at the hands of the regime that controls them. Their hatred for Israel is so great, and I think that they are willing to make these sacrifices to meet their ends. And I don't know all the ins and outs, and I never will, but we know to some extent that the regime is funded by many other people in many other countries, probably some Western countries.
In the end, one is left with the position of, as I was saying earlier, what is the biblical view, and can we bring hope to people in those situations that it is a spiritual solution, not a political one? Do you think that the situation we've got, say, right now, Israel, Arabs, Hamas, what's going on, and these unresolved questions, do you think it's eroding our faith or the faith of our friends or others in the ecclesial world? Do you think or is it strengthening our faith in a kind of a different way?
I had a moment in the shower not that long ago. Good time for reflection. Where it's like, what I'm seeing is what God prophesied would happen is happening. And I might not like it. I don't like it. But I can't deny that this is exactly what God said would happen. And that honestly builds my faith.
I think just the past few months and since October 7th, this whole period of time has been a really good exercise in balancing, for me, the academic with the feeling and the emotion and like the love of Christ, because I felt something so deeply on October 7th. It really struck me how horrific this was, and it goes back to God's plan and the principles of Christ and how our faith is going to continue to build through things that we don't necessarily understand, and they're going to make us feel things. They're going to make us feel sad and scared and tired and confused, but at the end of the day, it's an incredible example of how God had a plan with Abraham, and in 2024, we're still talking about it, we're still thinking about it, we're still seeing it in the news, and that is quite astounding.
It's just very real. Like, you always look towards the kingdom and like, I want it to come soon, and it's so far away, and like, I just thinking of how bad it's going to get before that, and just maybe that I'm not going to have to worry about that. Like, my mind is constantly running around, and I feel like I overthink a lot of things. But like, God is only asking us to do things in moments and to take a step at a certain moment. So if we are to be able to select one person that we disagree with, or like their opinions are adversarial opinions, if we take it and we try and set up some conversation with them and challenge ourselves to actually listen and actually be peacemakers instead of like that, hopefully I do that coming out of this. Because the other side of it is just horrible. And that's what I normally do, is just sow discord and live in discord. So.
One thing about our faith that I think is really positive and is such in stark contrast to the conversation we're having is like every prophecy you read about Jesus' return to Israel, to Mount Zion, to the restoring of Jerusalem, like it's the most beautiful, hopeful, peaceful language. You can't even imagine, like when you look at the pictures we see of the suffering on both sides right now, you can't even picture that region in any other way, and yet that's like that's such a hopeful message. It's the end of Matthew, but Jesus at that time says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, he's so upset, and he says, you're not, like I want to gather you like chicks. He's feeling so tender towards the destruction he knew was about to happen. And then he says, the next time you see me, you'll say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Like, what a contrast that back then it was so rife with hatred even and horror, and again we're back there, and yet people who live there now in that entire region are going to look at Jesus, the very Jesus, and say like, blessed, like you're blessed, and you're coming in the name of our God. And it's hard to picture many, especially secular Jews today, looking at Jesus Christ and saying, you come in the name of our God, right? Like it's unfathomable,
Yeah,
really.
right. Yes, it's important to appreciate that the prophecy is given to us to give us hope.